In the wake of the Mueller report, there have been growing scrutiny and questions over edits and omissions in the special counsel's findings. Of course, this comes as Attorney General William Barr has been given the authority to declassify documents related to the origins of the Russia investigation. That includes FISA warrants that targeted my next guest. Joining me right now is Carter Page. He is former foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign and famously spied on. Good to see you, Carter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
Well, I want to talk about what's going to happen in the week ahead, because there seems to be a lot of expectation that we'll see more information, documents coming out. What are you expecting in the week ahead first?
I think, as Chairman Meadows was saying, the more transparency, the better. So, we'll have to wait and see. There's been a lot of promises and a lot of calls from strong leaders like him, Chairman Graham, Chairman Grassley, Chairman Nunes, going back years already. So hopefully we finally start seeing some results.
Well, tell me about what you're expecting. We talked about this earlier. You said you think there's going to be an avalanche of information. What kind of information might we find out from some of these documents that none of us have ever seen before?
Well, I think, as you were alluding to in your last segment, really what we had here in the Mueller report was just a half the story, right? There are so many specific details related to what actually happened, which was just, in this document, just completely spun to advance the Democrats' narrative and to try to push forward with the ridiculous concept of impeachment. So we'll have to wait and see, but I think, the more information, the better.
Explain that for a second, because you had dealings with certain people and you had worked with the FBI and the State Department before. You were actually reporting back to them about information about people. And then the way it was spun was Carter Page, Trump campaign advisor, is dealing with Russian agent Kilimnik or Russian agent whomever. So tell me what happened.
Well, look, I think there is just completely false stories where, as you're correctly alluding to, I was asked various questions, not only by, state FBI, et cetera, but also CIA. I had a long-standing relationship with the CIA going back decades, essentially. And, I was always very transparent, open, and unfortunately, it was completely spun that, as you're correctly alluding to in this fake Mueller report, they just refer to this as, oh, he's colluding, if you will, with these Russian intelligence officers. I'm acting as a source, right? Completely helping our government. And actually, oh, by the way, doing it for free, as opposed to these DNC consultants who are getting paid by the DNC, getting paid by Russian oligarchs, but also getting, 11 payments, as Judicial Watch has uncovered, in the year 2016, which is just so unethical.
So when you spoke with Mr. Kilimnik, for example, or when you spoke with Mr. Halper, for example, were you under the impression that you were getting information for the State Department and the CIA and the FBI at that time? You had no idea that you were actually being surveilled?
Yeah, absolutely. To the best of my recollection, I don't think I ever crossed paths with Mr. Kilimnik, but I know I had a long-standing relationship with Professor Halper, and, we'll see. Again, I always believe in innocent till proven guilty, but this was my conversations with him intensified right the month before my illegitimate FISA warrant in September 2016, when all these defamatory articles are being placed by the DNC. And, essentially all of my relationships with people in the Trump campaign and then Trump transition team and then early into the first months of the administration were all essentially underground. It was always sort of behind the scenes. And Professor Halper was being very positive, and, he was like sort of a Harriet Tubman figure of, he understands sort of the injustices of or he presented himself as understanding that. And, I sort of trusted him. And, if this is true, again, it's sad about the FBI because they haven't admitted anything yet. I mean, there are these ridiculous statements that there's no spying, et cetera. But, we'll have to wait and see.
So let me get this straight. You're working with the CIA for decades, and you are reporting information back to the CIA for decades. Mm-hmm. And suddenly somebody puts your name in a Yahoo News article that you are a Trump campaign figure, perhaps colluding with these Russian individuals who you were actually getting information for for the CIA.
Absolutely.
That's exactly what happened.
Yes, that, and and it's part of, there's a lot of misrepresentations in all
Hold
of this.
that thought. We want to talk about this when we come right back. Stay with us. More with Carter Page next. Welcome back, and we are back with former foreign policy advisor to the Trump campaign, Carter Page. Carter, the reason I'm asking you about these individuals who were named in the Mueller report is because many congressmen have come on this program, lawmakers have said, once you prove that some of these people who reached out to you were actually assets of the FBI, of the State Department, of the CIA, that blows up the whole idea that these were just, coincidences. Yeah. I'm talking about people like Stephen Halper. I'm talking about people like Stephen Schrage. Stephen Schrage is one individual that you haven't really spoken about before, but he invited you to that Cambridge conference, didn't he?
Yes, I've admitted that in various testimonies, both to the grand jury as well as in Congress as well. But, again, I think both the Democrats in Congress and the Democrats on this fake Mueller commission were sort of pushing this false narrative. And every time we talked about anything dossier related or anything, U.S. intelligence assets coming after us related, they immediately tried to shift the subject.
Isn't it quite extraordinary that you had so many international friends of the State Department, of the CIA, that were actually coming at you and at George Papadopoulos? I mean, Alexander Downer, Stephen Halper, Stephen Schrage. These, I mean, Downer, for example, was from Australia. The other's from the UK. And they're reaching out to you talking about your consultancy business and how they tell me what they said to you.
Well, I don't recall ever getting contacted by Downer. I may have crossed paths with them at some point. To me, the bigger issue and the problem is less the fact that I'm having conversations with some people. That's completely benign. To the contrary, as I explained to Professor Halper and so many other people, including members of the FBI counterintelligence team, I was getting these constant death threats or frequent death threats.
Once your name was in the paper, a Yahoo News story targeted you as a Trump campaign worker who was colluding, potentially.
Yeah, and the sad part about it to me is that both, Director Comey, Deputy Director McCabe, and even Mr. Mueller. I mean, I told his committee that, I had these threats, and no one ever mentioned any of that in this 448-page report.
So do you think you were a tool? Do you think they just took advantage of you?
I'm just concerned about national security and the fact that the Democrats led this really illegal efforts against our democracy and our electoral system and led to all these death threats, not only to me, but so many other people.
You got a lot of death threats, I know.